Setsuko Thurlow, she's a Canadian. She's been in Canada for 50 years, but she's originally from Japan, and she's a Hiroshima survivor, and she'll share with us her personal testimony of that experience. At the age of 13, she became the victim of the world's first atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Educated in Japan as a social worker, Setsuko has dedicated her adult life to the total abolition of nuclear weapons and has traveled around the world with the Hiroshima message. She comes to us today from Toronto. Welcome, Setsuko.
Thank you. I am grateful to be with you today to observe this significant day, anniversary of Dr. Enrico Fermi and his team, Successful Experiment. I have read much about the work of Dr. Fermi and his team, but I have never dreamt that one day I would actually be here. My mind and heart is filled with awe and pain. Nevertheless, it is very significant that this conference provides us an opportunity to ponder the meaning of living in nuclear age. Listening to all of you yesterday and today, I am so deeply moved by your passionate, energetic attempt to share and learn from each other. Thank you for that inspiration. I would like to share with you my experience of atomic bombing of Hiroshima and some thoughts related to it. In the spring of 1945, after the US capture of islands of Tinian and Saipan in the South Pacific, carpet bombing of Dresden and Covenant in Europe were transferred to Japan. Starting with the massive air raids of Tokyo by hundreds of B-29 Super Fortress bombers, with over 100,000 casualties overnight. Approximately 70% of major cities of Japan were already incinerated. My hometown of Hiroshima was ranked the 10th largest city at that time, but was spared from the ongoing raids, although daily and nightly reconnaissance flight kept us sleepless and ready to run to shelter in the darkened city. People's anxiety grew by the day, wondering, why not us? Little did we know that Hiroshima had been already selected for target and was deliberately kept intact to assess the effects of a new type of weapon. The target was set as military installation surrounded by people's residences. Thus, the inclusion of citizens in the indiscriminate attack was in the original plan. This was one of the recommendations made by the interim committee to the President Truman. On August 6, 1945, I was a 13-year-old grade 8 student in the student mobilization program. I was with about 30 other girls working at the Army headquarters as a decoding assistant. The building was 1.8 kilometers, 1 mile from the hypocenter. The morning began at 8 a.m. with a briefing and pep talk. Major Yanai said, "Girls, you've been trained perfectly for this job. Prove your patriotic spirit for the emperor's sake." "Yes, sir, we will." At that moment, I saw the bluish-white flash outside the window. I remember having the sensation of floating in the air. The building was collapsing, and my body was thrown up in the air. As I regained consciousness in the silence and in the total darkness, I found myself pinned by the ruins of the collapsed building. I could not move. I knew I was faced with death. I began to hear my classmates' cries, "Mother, help me. God, help me." Then suddenly, I felt hand touching my left shoulder from behind and heard the man's voice saying, "Don't give up, keep pushing, keep moving. I'm trying to free you. See the light coming through that opening. Crawl towards it and get out of this place as quickly as possible." By the time I came out, the ruins were already on fire. That meant about 30 girls who were with me in the same room were burned to death alive. A soldier ordered me and 2 other girls, surviving girls, to escape to the nearby hills. I looked around. Although it was morning, it was dark as twilight, with dust and smoke rising in the air. I saw streams of ghostly figures slowly shuffling from the center of the city toward the nearby hills. They were naked and tattered, bleeding, burned, blackened, and swollen. Part of their bodies were missing, flesh and skin hanging from their bones, some with their eyeballs hanging in their hands, and some with their stomachs burst open with intestines hanging out. We girls joined the ghostly procession, carefully stepping over the dead and dying. There was a deathly silence, broken only by the moans of the injured and their plea for water. The foul stench of burnt skin and flesh filled the air. At the foot of the hill was an army training ground about the size of 2 football fields. It was covered with the dead and injured who were desperately begging, often in faint whispers, "Water, water, please, please give me water." But we had no containers to carry water. We went to a nearby stream to wash off the blood and dirt from our bodies. Then we tore off our blouses, soaked them with water, and hurried back to hold them to the mouths of the injured, who desperately sucked in moisture. We kept busy at this task all day. We did not see any doctors or nurses. When darkness fell, We sat on the hillside and all night watched the entire city burn. Numbed by the massive and grotesque scale of death and suffering we had witnessed. The following day, my parents came in search of me. My father had been out of town, and my mother was rescued out of our collapsed house. But my sister and her 4-year-old son were crossing the bridge to go to the doctor at the moment of detonation, and were burned, blackened, and swollen beyond recognition. We could identify my sister only by her voice and the unique hairpins she wore in her hair. We escaped to our relatives' damaged summer house on the hill, where we cared for them for several days without food nor medicine until death released them from their agony. Their bodies were thrown into the ditches dug out by the soldiers, covered with gasoline, and set on fire. Soldiers kept turning the bodies, uttering, "Stomach is not quite burned yet, and head is half burned." My parents and I stood there, emotionless, tearless, and speechless. It was the most grotesque cremation, totally devoid of human dignity and respect. This memory of my inability to act normally, like shedding tears, troubled me for many years, until I went to university and studied the human behavior in the ultimate condition. Dr. Lifton of Harvard called this phenomena psychic numbing, paralysis of the mind, which practically all of the survivors experienced. In the center of the city, my own age group of over 8,000 grade 7 and 8 students from all the high schools in the city were engaged in the task of clearing fire lanes. My sister-in-law was there as a supervising teacher. Many of them were simply vaporized instantly by the heat of 4,000 degrees Celsius. We never found the body of my sister-in-law. Radiation, as you all know, the unique characteristic of atomic bombing, affected people in mysterious and random ways, with some dying immediately and others weeks, months, or years later by the delayed effects. And the radiation is still killing survivors today, 67 years later. My uncle and aunt survived the bombing without any apparent physical injury. But then, about a week later, they started feeling very sick and started developing purple spots all over their bodies. My mother noted that their internal organs seemed to be rotting and were coming out as a thick black fluid. In those days, the first thing we did in the morning was to check every corner of our bodies to make sure there was no purple spot, indicating imminent death. Thus, my beloved city of Hiroshima suddenly became desolation, with heaps of ash and rubble, skeletons, and blackened corpses. Its population of 360,000, most of whom were non-combatant women, children, and elderly, became victims of the indiscriminate massacre of atomic bombing. By the end of 1945, approximately 140,000, and as of present day, approximately 260,000 have perished because of the effects of the blast, heat, and radiation. Following Japan's surrender, General MacArthur governed Japan as the supreme commander of the Allied forces and introduced some needed and beneficial reforms in education, agriculture, women's social and political rights, labor unions, corporate structure, and so forth. Demilitarization and democratization was his main goals. Within days, however, the US occupation authorities imposed a press code in order to censor and even confiscate any newspaper and magazine articles on the topic of survivors' suffering. The occupation authorities confiscated diaries people kept, poems, photographs, medical specimens, slides for microscopes, and doctors' treatment records, or some 32,000 items in all. Informing the world of the American scientific and engineering triumph was acceptable, but describing the suffering of survivors was not. Because of this politically oppressive and hostile milieu, survivors were deprived of the normal process of grieving following their massive trauma and had to repress their suffering in silence and isolation. An additional injury to the psyche of the survivors was caused by the American establishment of the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Its mandate was solely to study the effects of radiation upon human beings, but not to offer treatment, even though tens of thousands were suffering from inadequate medical care. The ABCC did not even share its findings with Japanese doctors who were trying to deal with the new and unknown medical problems of radiation. The survivors' sense of outrage at twice being treated as guinea pigs had to be repressed because of occupation policies. With the return of the full sovereignty to Japan in 1952, a flood of political, scientific, medical, and historical information suddenly became available, enabling journalists, researchers, and scholars for the first time to see the experience of survivors in historical perspective and global context. Gradually, they came to be aware that the main motive for the atomic bombing was political rather than military, to impress the Soviet Union and to force Japan to surrender before the Soviet Union could enter the war. They did not see it as a military necessity, as stated by a well-known American myth that bombs shortened the war. These points were supported by the US Strategic Bombing Survey, as well as the views of other generals like General Eisenhower and several others, I can't remember their names, and later by historians. The survivors saw themselves not as sacrifice on the altar of peace, but as a pawn in the opening move of Cold War. Some survivors were able to conceptualize and articulate the meaning of nuclear weapon as a threat to planetary survival. This ability enabled them to transcend their own personal tragedies and to become committed to the mission of warning the world of the danger of nuclear age. They were convinced that humanity and nuclear weapon could not coexist, and that no human being should ever have to repeat our experience of the inhumanity, illegality, immorality, and cruelty of atomic bomb. These visionary survivors empowered other survivors to become activated and to be the core of Japan's powerful peace movement. That's the end of my written speech. So I will, thank you. So let me, I think I have some time. I'd like to just speak. Can I?
Yes.
Do I have time?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just talk this time. In 1954, where I finished university in Hiroshima, and I came to Virginia, your country, on scholarship. And within a couple of days, I was interviewed by the press, and I was asked to talk about my feeling about what was happening in the South Pacific and in Japan. This is about the testing of the biggest hydrogen bomb at the Bikini Atoll. You know about the total chaos at that time. That was April 1945. August of that year, I came to United States. And I was rather naive, fresh out of college, and I honestly shared my opinion that continuing testing in the South Pacific was doing more harm to humans and animal environment, and Japanese were suffering from lack of sushi and sashimi and all that. Anyway, I gave critical opinion about US testing. And lo and behold, following day, I started receiving unsigned hate letters. They said, we Japanese deserve that because we were sneaky at the Pearl Harbor, and those bombs did a good job. They are good bombs. Those things were the content of the letter. I was frightened. Within the few days of being in the United States, this was the welcome I received. I had to think. I had to do soul searching. What do I do? Do I put the zipper over my mouth and pretend I know nothing about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Or bikini? It was a very traumatic week for me, but I was able to come out of that experience with stronger commitment that it is my responsibility to share my memories of what we experienced. I was very disturbed to see many young people just echoing president narratives. Bombs were necessary. The war had to be ending as quickly as possible. I felt people were not giving any serious thought. There was no serious thought, no moral sense, just it was okay. It was good bombs. I think that idea of good bombs was deeply penetrated into the psyche of American people. And I think that influenced your government, a continuing development of the weapons and rushing into the nuclear arms race. There is definitely relationship between the justification of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the later development of nuclear weapons. Well, I couldn't go back home. I just arrived. How do I live? I have to study. I have to know more about the meaning of what I experienced in Hiroshima. So I desperately started reading, and one person's writing, which really helped me greatly, was Professor Richard Falk, international law specialist at the Princeton University. And that really helped me to organize my thoughts in a legal, moral way. And I want to share that with you. He said this: the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were viewed as contribution to the ending of a popular and just war. Therefore, they have never been appraised in the necessary way as atrocities. They have never been understood as they certainly would have been understood had Hiroshima and Nagasaki been located in an allied countries. Somehow, we've got to create that awareness so that Hiroshima is understood to have been on the same level of depravity and in many ways far more dangerous to us as a species and as a civilization than was even Auschwitz. This kind of writing he does, that was a tremendous help. Now, after a year in Virginia, I went to University of Toronto in Canada, and I saw different culture, different people. They view the nuclear issues belong to Americans and Japanese, not to them. Without realizing, the Canadian scientists were involved in the Manhattan Project, and it was the Canadian uranium which was used for the bomb which exploded above me And the Prime Minister of Canada wrote in his diary that he was glad it was used on Japanese, not on the white race of Europe. Shame, yes. They didn't know. I had to tell them, and that shocked them. But anyway, it's interesting. The same thing, there are different perspectives about the nuclear age. The people's perspective in Japan, in the United States, and the Canadian. Canadian feel it's the problem between United States and Japan. Not to realize it was a universal problem. This is a problem which applies to everyone on the planet. So I have to stop here. But we can have discussion.
And we have time for Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much for your very powerful personal remembrances. After such a horrific experience in Japan, how the heck did your government sell you on the nuclear power plants?
To answer that, you have to know the political relationship between Japan and the United States. You know, Japan has a peace. Oh, okay. Well, I think in early 1950, no, that was 53, right, when President Eisenhower introduced that idea at the UN. And, you know, it's interesting. I was living in Hiroshima at that time. I saw the American government employee, official, living in Hiroshima at that time, played a major role in promoting the use of nuclear energy. And I thought, gee, this is interesting. Anyway, maybe that was part of the function. But anyway, when Atom for Peace was introduced, people and the government were euphoric. Finally, they would have the access to, endless access to energy. So they were euphoric, and the government, without having the public debate, just went ahead, made a decision, and established 54 plants. Now, you have to remember the fact that Japan, by constitution, is not allowed to arm itself. Therefore, Japanese government decided to depend on U.S. Nuclear umbrella. That means Japan is, unfortunately, so subservient to the U.S. policy. That is really the source of much of the problem, whether it's a nuclear weapon or nuclear energy.
I've been attending memorials here since 1974, and one of the Hibakusha who lived around here, Hideko Tamura, Tammy Friedman, was a regular...
Hideko Tamura? I know her. She came to the same school with me in Hiroshima. I spoke to her last week.
Oh, great.
She's in Oregon.
Wow.
Yes?
Great. Yeah. In 1974, we had the Shadow Project, where we, after Robert Lifton's articles talking about the shadows that were left, we had people lie down on the sidewalk, and we drew, like for homicides, we drew chalk circles around them, and it was pretty moving. And we did it as kind of a regular thing, and Hideko was a part of that. Anyway, I was just hoping you knew her. We'll talk to her later about her. But her story is, if anybody is familiar with the late Studs Terkel's book, The Good War, Hideko's story is in there. Hideko's story is in Studs Terkel's book, The Good War. along with other radiation victims. I work with the Alliance of Atomic Veterans, and there are about 250,000 GIs in the United States between 1945 and 1963 were used as guinea pigs in bomb tests and 200 atmospheric weapons tests. And I wrote a couple articles for the Chicago Reader about that. So I'd like to talk to you more about that. Most of them have passed on. Yeah, and their stories are not well known, but they were very much a part of the anti-nuclear movement and a part of the peace movement here. And they were incredible fighters. Went out to the Nevada test site to do demonstrations, and they did civil disobedience out there. So just hoping to connect that way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to add just the deepest also thanks to you, Setsuko Thurlow, and that you probably may have heard or you know this, that there was a group of folks in our area that tried to organize an effort to nominate the Hibakusha. Actually, there have been a number of these efforts to nominate the Hibakusha for a Nobel Peace Prize as a whole group.
Wow.
And because the truth, whether or not it got pretty far, the effort that arose up in our area, it made a good headway, but they didn't quite vote for it, the committee. But anyway, that's just to say that there are really countless of us in this country, and I know around the world, who really know in the cells of our being that it is you and your brother and sister Hibakusha who are the spiritual and moral force of awakening, of the rest of us to abolition of nuclear weapons and now nuclear power too. And so we just want to take a moment to thank you very much, and we know it's not easy, but thank you. And I do want to just add one thing to the woman's question about nuclear power in Japan. I happened to read that when the Hiroshima Peace Museum was opened, at the inaugural ceremony, the U.S. Embassy spent, I think it was $1 million, which was a lot for those days. This was in the early 50s. To put a nuclear reactor core, not yet used, but actually in front of the museum, this Atoms for Peace. So, so there would be so many Hibakusha there. So this is right in Hiroshima, the Peace Museum. The museum, how could they object? So, the propaganda is intense, and the U.S. The very first reactors were in Japan were Westinghouse, I believe, and they were installed the same way in this country. Oh, we'll fix your roads, we'll build schools, and so on. And meanwhile, the people and the fish die, and so on. But it's a very sad story. But it's unfortunately a lot in our hands. And as Mrs. Thurlow was saying, the political domination, military domination from the U.S. towards Japan is a major, major piece of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to join my thanks to you, Setsuko-san, and honor you for your great courage to tell us these hard stories, true stories. To me, your presentation takes us to the very, very heart of our nuclear work. We have heard many facts and figures. We've seen on this screen charts, all kinds of horrifying things. But our emotions are what count, because our emotions, not our brains and the facts they hold, are what lead us into action that is so deeply felt we can never, never stop. I've been part of Never Again campaign from Hiroshima for many years. I would like to take every person who is pro-nuclear into the Hiroshima Memorial Museum with me. I've been to Hiroshima 4 or 5 times. I can't stand it, but I can't stay away from it. And I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for keeping us with a moral compass.